On the crowded streets of Manila, a barefoot boy who calls a cardboard box his home is about to do something that will bring a busy city to a standstill, make a famous music producer weep, and force everyone to ask the same question: how can someone who has nothing possess a voice that sounds like it has everything? Subscribe now to see the moment that broke the internet. The sun was brutal that afternoon, baking the concrete of Manila's financial district until it shimmered like a mirage. Office workers in crisp shirts hurried past with paper cups of iced coffee, their eyes fixed on their phones, ignoring the heat and the usual city noise. Among the blur of suits and taxis, a small figure moved against the flow. His name was Jun Jun, and at 12 years old, he was already a veteran of the streets. His clothes were a patchwork of donations, his feet black with grime, and his home was a flattened cardboard box tucked behind a dumpster. He wasn't begging. He wasn't stealing. He was just walking, clutching a cheap, cracked plastic toy ukulele that a street vendor had thrown away weeks ago. Jun Jun found his spot near the entrance of a towering glass building, a place where the air smelled of perfume and expensive coffee. He didn't place a hat or a cup on the ground for coins. He just sat against the cool wall, closed his eyes, and began to strum. The ukulele was out of tune, the strings frayed, but the melody he played was soft and melancholic. People stepped over his outstretched legs, treating him like another piece of sidewalk debris. A security guard started to walk toward him, hand raised to shoo him away, but then Jun Jun started to sing. It wasn't a pop song or a current radio hit. It was an old folk song, a haunting melody about longing for a home and a mother's love. And the voice that came out of this starving, dirty, forgotten child was not his own. It was a voice so pure, so powerful, and so full of raw, aching soul that it didn't seem to belong to the mortal world. It cut through the city noise like a bell. The security guard froze, his hand dropping to his side. The woman with the iced coffee stopped mid-sip. A man in a business suit, mid-sentence on his phone, simply stopped talking and listened. A crowd began to form, a silent circle around the boy. People pulled out their phones, not to scroll, but to record. They were mesmerized. You could see the confusion on their faces, the question in their eyes: how could this voice come from this boy? As he sang about a mother's embrace, a single tear traced a path through the dirt on his cheek, and there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. When the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence, a collective held breath, before the street erupted in applause. People weren't just clapping, they were crying, throwing money, shoving bills into his hands. But Jun Jun just looked at the money, then up at the faces, a look of pure wonder on his face. He hadn't done it for the money. He had just needed to sing. The video of that moment, uploaded by a random office worker, exploded. It was shared millions of times. The headline was always the same: homeless boy with the voice of an angel. People from across the globe watched it, moved by the raw talent and the tragic contrast. The story went viral for all the right reasons, a beacon of pure, uncorrupted human spirit. But then came the twist. A few days later, a famous and notoriously cynical music producer named Ricardo Cruz saw the video. He had launched the careers of some of Asia's biggest pop stars. He was known for having a heart of stone and an ear for gold. He flew to Manila, found Jun Jun in his usual spot, and offered him a deal that would change his life: a record contract, a proper home, and education. It was the fairy tale ending everyone was hoping for. Ricardo took Jun Jun to his state-of-the-art studio, a playground of buttons and speakers. He sat the boy down, put a pair of expensive headphones on his ears, and said, "Okay, kid. Let's see if you're the real deal. Sing for me." The soundproof booth was dark and quiet. Jun Jun, overwhelmed by the sterile cleanliness, looked small and lost. He started to sing the same folk song. But this time, the voice that came out was different. It was flat. It was timid. It was just the voice of a scared, tired little boy. The magic was gone. Ricardo, frustrated, tried a pop song, a rock ballad, anything. But the voice that had stopped traffic in the street was nowhere to be found. It was as if the soul had been drained out of him. Ricardo was about to give up, convinced the whole thing was a fluke, a trick of the wind, when he had one last idea. He drove Jun Jun back to the city. He took off the boy's new shoes and gave him back his old, broken ukulele. He sat him down in the exact same spot on the dirty pavement, against the cold glass wall, as the evening rush hour began. Jun Jun looked up at him, confused. Ricardo just nodded and said, "Sing for them, Jun Jun. Not for me." And there, back where he belonged, surrounded by the noise and the grime and the people rushing home, Jun Jun closed his eyes, strummed the out-of-tune ukulele, and began to sing. The first note hit the air, and it was the same pure, powerful, soul-shaking sound from the video. The magic was back. It was as if the street itself was his amplifier, and the noise of the city was his band. The voice didn't come from a recording studio or a comfortable life. It came from a deep well of pain, longing, and an unshakable connection to the real, raw world. The street filled with people again, drawn by the siren's call. Ricardo watched from a distance, finally understanding. The voice wasn't just a talent. It was a gift born from his hardship. To take him away from the streets was to take away the very thing that made his voice so beautiful. It was a heartbreaking paradox. The story didn't end with a record deal. It ended with something more profound. Ricardo didn't make Jun Jun a star. Instead, he used his money and influence to build a small shelter and music school right there in the district. It was a place where street children could come, get a meal, a bed, and learn music, without ever having to leave their world behind. Jun Jun became the school's first student. He still sits on the pavement sometimes and sings, because that is where his voice lives. And when he does, the people still stop, and they still listen, not to a product but to a person. A homeless boy who had nothing taught a rich man what it truly means to have a home, and proved that sometimes the most beautiful things in the world can only exist right where they are. Before you go, we want to know, from which part of the country are you watching this incredible story today? Let us know in the comments below.